could maybe start, or Jillian, and we'll work our way this way. So, Jillian, this is your name and who you are in short verse.
Good afternoon. My name is Jillian Hovey, and I come to you from the land of my grandmother, Huron, in the province we know as Ontario. And I am a permaculturalist, and I've been working with eco-villages for the past 20 years or so. And not only am I from Canada, I've been working internationally for the past decade. I've been homeless and overseas for many years. I've worked in almost 40 countries now across 5 continents, and it's one of my deepest privileges and honors to learn from other people and be in other lands. So I was honored to work with Skeeter to help to put together this panel, and thanks for joining. I'll pass it to Dan.
Thank you, Skeeter. And here I am today, folks. My name is Dan Nanamkin. He's Kla. That's my name. And I'm really grateful to be here. I'm going to try to keep pumped up a little bit because we had a great lunch, and I know it could be kind of tired and feel down. Well, we need to keep it lively as well, and I want to keep it lively. I just drove 30 hours to be up here with you folks, so I don't want to come up here and sleep. I can have you awake and alive and share some love with you. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm really grateful to see our elders and our people here from our indigenous nations that I got to speak to earlier. How many people were at our talk earlier? Raise your hand, do some whooping around. See our live. We got to keep it alive, folks. We got to keep it alive. We're here to live. We have this life to live. So let's live this life. We sit back here, we get comfortable in how things are. We get comfortable with us sitting there watching somebody else do all this work that the earth needs. We got to get up and be strong and powerful and feel that spirit inside. So my name is Coach Clyde, and I'm just a regular old man just here to be with you and share some love. Thank you.
My name is Maya Elson. I am it's so hard to try to summarize myself like this, but if I had to give it one sentence, it would be I'm a listener in training. I'm really learning how to listen on many levels, listen to the land, listen to people, listen to the feelings, listen to the deity. And how that's been translating in my life is I'm an environmental educator. I work with Nature Connection, helping rebuild connection with nature with kids, and I do nature-based rite of passage work with young women, and I lead mushroom hunts. I take wealthy people from Silicon Valley out into nature and try to teach them about reciprocity with nature. I'm a mushroom nerd, and I work with a small nonprofit called Co-Renewal and Amisachu. Amisachu is our project in Ecuador that collaborates with indigenous communities in order to develop solutions for cleaning up an incredible amount of waste and pollution caused by Chevron. And I could tell you guys all about that. But and so we're looking at bacterial and fungal remediation for that.
So hello everyone. My name is Tiffany Y'vonne, and I would say at my core, I identify as a community cultivation practitioner. And so what does that mean? At the end of the day, my livelihood is about working with communities. And I only work at 2 levels. I work with individuals who are intentionally building communities where they are locally, or I work with groups. And so one of the things that I get often is, well, what about organizations? In our framework, organizations are just complex groups at the end of the day. I would say the thing that I would want to share with each of you, what really drives me, what cores me, what anchors me, is I love life. And so I can really resonate with that. And I love life and the energy of life, and recognizing that life and death are also, they coexist together. And That is why I'm here. That is why I serve in the community. That is what connects me to my ancestors, to my present, and to the future when I'm thinking of my child, because I'm also a parent. And also the work that I do with families as well. I mostly work within the Puget Sound region of Washington State, but I also do work on the East Coast, particularly along the North Carolina coast as well, and also in the Bay Area of California.
Aloha, folks. My name is Herman. I've spent half my life living, teaching, and writing in Hawaii. Originally from South Africa, born and raised in South Africa, close to the last remnants of pristine African wilderness. Had a profound influence on me. Left during apartheid, educated in England. Got a solid science education at a good English university. Disillusioned with academia, went to live on kibbutz, which at the time was a utopian socialist model community, and then got disillusioned with the direction the country was going in, participated in a war, left Israel, found sanctuary on the islands of Hawaii, about as far from my birthplace as you can get at the end of the planet, and spent the rest of the time figuring out what had gone wrong, what is going wrong on the planet, and what had gone wrong in my life, and what is going right, and trying to put it all together, and coming up with a model for living my own life, how it was that I got some idea of what is good, true, and beautiful, and how this might be able to help other communities and the species as a whole, because clearly we are in deep trouble. Good to be here. Thank you all for coming. Aloha.
Thanks, Louis. Again, for those who weren't here in the beginning, my name is Ben Browner. I'm a local regional event producer. I'll be moderating the panel today and feel very honored to do such. As of now, we only have one microphone, but we've got one or two on the way, so excuse that technical difficulty and or opportunity. I'm not sure yet. It kind of gives us some good organic time. Really glad you're here with us today. The Earth Repair Conference. I've been really enthralled to see just how broadly this term is interpreted, Earth Repair. And within that kind of grandiose, all-inclusive umbrella, there's so many ways in which we can take it. And the same goes for cultural repair. I'd venture to say that the two are really tied at the hip. So I'm going to keep my first question really broad to you all, and just curious to you, whoever feels called to answer first. What does cultural repair mean to you in this moment, in this context?
Actually, I was invited here before. Those of you that didn't hear my speech this morning, I was in Arizona all week for training, and Friday at 5 o'clock we got done, and I drove all the way from Flagstaff. It took me 30 hours, got here 1 o'clock in the morning. Originally I was supposed to be, I was invited to do a presentation. I didn't think I'd make it here, but I really wanted to honor, my commitment, my word to be here. And that's just kind of something I wanted to speak about. And for me to really get into it and speak about it, it would take me an hour long. And I know our moderator says we only have this long to talk about it, so this is a challenge. But to me, when I talk about our indigenous culture and repair, and we talk about the earth, we talk about the environment, we look back at our food sources, our medicine sources, and how we were interconnected with each other, with our tribes. We had networks of trade. Different foods and medicines grew in this region, and there's different foods and medicine that grow in that region. So we interconnected with one another, and that's how we lived very healthy, but we also had an exchange with the land. That was our reciprocation, So we have protocols with our lands, our foods, our medicines. Each one of our tribes, I believe we all have those things. That's our respect for the earth. Well, once this colonization, genocide took place. And now you drive anywhere, you see no trespass, no trespass. You see these barbed wire fences, all these things. Those things didn't exist. We used to live freely, but we used to have respect for one another and protocols and how we gathered and went to the land. Now when they forced us onto the government prisoner of war camps, which is the reservation, we couldn't leave the confines within that reservation, which grew smaller and smaller and smaller, kept us away from our food sources, our medicines, and our interaction with one another. And so our relationship to the land suffered, and the land suffered because of that result. The medicine people and the people who had that knowledge of the foods in those different ways, they were also annihilated in many of our reservations. So it's that connection that's been lost because of forced assimilation and genocide. Nowadays, we have this opportunity to bring some of that back. I was talking to a sister earlier who worked with the plants and the roots and medicines like that, and encourage her to continue learning, but to continue to share. My brothers and sisters, we all have different skills. Maybe the songs, I shared some songs with you today earlier, and some of the meanings behind these songs, the languages, our cultures, our symbology of our indigenous tribes and our way of life. We're strong people, and we're bringing these things back. So I'm really grateful for our elders who, maintain this way of life best we could. We're coming back. It's with the youth. So I could go on, and I could hear somebody, so that means I better quit. But I just want to really say that's just something that comes to my heart at this moment.
I'll go. I appreciate the question of really sitting with when we hear this phrase culture repair. Actually, earlier in a dialogue in an earlier workshop, it was earth repair is also people repair too. One of the questions that I have been sitting with a lot, I would say, in the work that I do at the very much the communal level, the grassroots level, is this question around what is it to be human? We talk about being human. We talk about humanity. And oftentimes there's this other piece of, environmental movement and whatnot. The question that I go back to is what is to be human? Because if we are also a species, a mini species, when we think about people, depending on your traditional beliefs that you may come from, people extends just beyond two-legged people, humans, right? Or if we talk about just humans as a species, then there are other species, so we're always in interspecial relationship. But oftentimes when we talk about nature, oh yeah, I really want to go out to nature. That's that part of it. Or I feel really connected to nature, and the question I go back to is, what is it to be human? Is a human also not nature? And if we hold that, and we're talking about culture, what does it mean when we sit with culture is nature? If culture was also nature, and we held that consciousness, and I feel emotional when I'm speaking about this. Who would our heroes be? What would be the stories that we would be passing on to our kids? What would be the values that we would be honoring? When we step onto the land that our ancestors ancestors walked, we would feel that connection. That would be a part of our identity, because culture is so much your identity. It is who you are. It is the story that we wrote to perpetuate. It's what the seeds that we want our children to grow up to be if we think about our children as seeds. So when we think about culture repair, that's what comes up for me. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a part of this circle of life that we're all a part of? And how do we live into that? How do we step into the healing that has to happen? Because healing is a big part of it. And that's something we don't heal alone. Healing happens together, it's communal. So as we're healing Earth, we heal our species as well. And we also learn our place, because humans have a place as well. That's where I'm sitting at right now.
Thank you, Tiffany. We have a problem with the relationship between culture and the living earth. I think that is sort of starting point for everybody at this conference, that there's a sickness in culture. And my special interest has been this understanding, diagnosing. I had a medical education and then a philosophical education. And I brought the two together. I tried to bring the two together in understanding the cause of the disease. There's a pathology, there's a break when culture emerges about 100,000 years ago. And actually it seems to have emerged along the beaches and in the bushes of South Africa. Southern Africa is where we find first signs of human culture emerging. So I've spent a lot of time thinking really deeply about that transformation. When human beings made that leap into the realm of culture, reflective self-consciousness, the beginning of politics, the beginning of religion, the beginning of ethics, and trying to analyze to what extent this was a blessing and to what extent this was a curse. And I think there's a sort of a primordial sinning that takes place that has generated the religions of the world. This idea that human beings make choices which are never certain. We never have absolute knowledge about right and wrong. So we are always in a situation where we could make mistakes. And we have to keep learning. In the realm of consciousness. So we have to organize our thinking and our understanding in a way that connects us to the living earth that gave birth to us. And when we lose that connection, what Dan talked about and what Tiffany talked about, we lose the immediate reminders of what created us, and we get caught up in our own creations. And so I've been trying to find a way back to reconnect with that primordial way of knowing that was the basis of the politics and religion of early societies. And I see it in my studies of indigenous societies, in my study of the San Bushmen, the Shukwasi of Southern Africa, the oldest indigenous culture on the planet, that still hunts and gathers in the same environment where that leap into human culture took place about 100,000 years ago. And I think that by retracing that story through history and through science, we can start healing ourselves and repairing culture. This is really what my work's about. I don't want to go on much longer about the content of that, but I think it's really helpful to recognize that there's a fundamental distinction between human culture, what we create, and what creates us. And keeping that in mind helps us heal ourselves and find the old ways. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been really thinking about this word repair, and what are we repairing to? There's no going back. We might be completing cycles, but it's an iterative process. It's ongoing, and I see it more as holing, creating more wholeness and completing cycles and bringing in the pieces that are quiet and balancing those with the pieces that are loud, balancing the energies. I've been developing these concepts, this thing calling mycopsychology. I've been trained in eco-psychology, and I felt like one piece that it felt really important that I was drawn to is the rebuilding our relationship with fungi and learning from them, and not having it just be a metaphor, but actually doing that, what we call myco-restoration, or what I call myco-renewal, myco-regeneration, doing that in a symbiotic way with the inner regeneration that we're processing. And one thing that came to me is very interesting is, I don't know if anybody's here is a mushroom nerd, but there's this process called training fungi, which we are now trying to shift the language to assisted adaptation, because you're not actually the one training them. They're figuring things out on their own, right? There's a lot of language in mycology that is shifting. I don't use the word colonizing substrate anymore. That's not what we're actually trying to do. But in any case, so let's say you have a novel pollutant, something that fungus has never dealt with before, and you want to be able to biodegrade that pollutant. And what you can do is you can put it on a petri dish with the mycelium, the culture of that fungus, and the fungus will first go just kind of sit back and put out what we call hyphae, little branches that will come out, and it's observing, and it's listening, and it's interacting with that pollutant. It's not attacking it. It's not just trying to destroy it, right? It's listening, and just kind of getting a sense of what's there. It's figuring out what the hydrocarbon molecules are structured like, really, is what it's doing. And then what it does is it goes back to its center, and it dips into its ancestry. And it goes through its genetic library and pulls out the enzymes that are needed to be able to work with that pollutant, and then it can digest it, right? And that's what I see my work as, especially as somebody who isn't indigenous to this land. It's so important to listen first, and give that even those most destructive, most terrifying voices a seat at the table, and then dip it, and then use your own ancestry. Like, we all, no matter where you're from in the world, your ancestors lived with the earth, right? And know how to do this. And by connecting with our own ancestry and our own inner power, and then of course, fungi also, many people know, are really good at building community, right? Connecting in, maybe there's another fungi over here that already knows how to deal with that toxic pollution. We can actually merge into the same being, right? And become a part of this incredible network that shares information and resources and water and redistributes it to where it's most needed, and helps complete the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle, right? Helping to complete the cycle. And I think when you're doing that work, what's really powerful about it is, I see it as, this work, I'm really into the term reparations. I was talking to my new friend Margot over here at lunch, and I was like, I'm going to be late for this panel on culture repair, but our conversation was the culture repair, it was happening, and I was talking about how, so many of us like to come in, people of European descent, we have this really bad habit, and I'm guilty of this, of coming in this is the solution, we're going to fix this, and we've got our white mushroom that's going to colonize this substrate and eat up all the oil, and how important it is, and how a lot of that impulse and a lot of that, need to have your ego involved comes from a lack of a sense of belonging, and a lot of shame around what our ancestors have done and what we're participating in. And I keep coming back over and over and over again. This might not be as helpful for the Native folks in the room, so I'm sorry if this isn't useful for you, but I want to, I want to lead you guys in a little exercise, if that's okay. We got a moment, we can just, so I just learned this, and it feels so like such a powerful tool, because I think so much of the trauma that we're inflicting on the planet, on each other, comes from a sense of shame. And in shame, let's just go into it. So if I can invite you to close your eyes and take a breath, and just notice what you feel shame about. What things you've done, what things maybe your ancestors have done, what things you benefit from, what privileges you might have. And notice what happens in your body, where you feel that shame. Does it shift your breath? Do you feel a tightening? And just let that shame be there. It's not going to hurt you. Shame is actually an incredible tool that teaches us what we need to do. When you feel shame, that's an incredibly beautiful, that can be a light that shines on what you need to fix or what you can be doing better. So give thanks to that shame and let it be there. And if you can, maybe notice where it's coming from. And a lot of times what people have found is it's coming from a lack of a sense of belonging. And that we all just want to feel like we belong somewhere. And when you find that sense of belonging, that desire to put yourself above others, or to do things that may cause harm, that might dissolve. Thanks.
Sago, good afternoon. I came upon the culture of this panel having been canceled yesterday. I was like, fuck that. And set about catalyzing the culture of repairing it. And there's so much richness here, and I remember when I used to be involved with bioregionalism 20 years ago, of the meme of I am my own bioregion, or I am a bioregion within bioregions within bioregions. And I'm thinking about, I'm French and English and Native American. Et si je vous commence à parler en français, si j'avais commencé d'abord comme ça, vous aurez peut-être d'avoir une autre appréciation, c'est quoi, c'est moi et ma culture. So if I had started speaking in French, you'd have a very different perception of me and my culture. And as I mentioned in my introduction briefly, I've worked in a number of different countries, which is a whole cultural construct. In the terrain of permaculture, probably everybody in this room has at least heard the term, and I think that we're still very far from understanding what that is. And maybe I'll stand up because I can't even see everybody. Permanent agriculture, permaculture. But permaculture is so much more than just farming and gardening. It's permanent culture, permaculture. And that's the place that I hold space around it, and I'm informed and I'm learning all the time. That said, I still have always had trouble with the word of assuming to say permanent, or the phrase to permanent culture. I think that there's in a level an arrogance that we don't fully rate, especially with the stupid, immature ways that we have lived. And I think that there is huge repair and reparations to be made. And thank you to my sisters for bringing in the meanings of nature, of which it's named, we are a part. And I think we need to wake up. And one of the biggest gifts that I've experienced in teaching is that magic moment of holding the space open to invite people back into the matrix of life. And I see a deep cultural repair that happens in individuals and the collective of the community in the courses. And I think that we have a long way to go, many, many generations. I remember when the meme came of 7 generations and everybody was so proud of getting that. And it was like, in my experience in Native communities, at least when I was growing up, people were having babies when they were in their late teens, mid-teens. And so I realized 7 generations was only about 120 years. You know, it's not this big, epic thing. And sure, that's a significant amount of time that we really need to get our act together in. It's well beyond that. It's like, do we merit being here? And I think by virtue of being alive, we merit being here, but in terms of our individual and our collective alignments of intelligence, or lack thereof, we've got a ways to go yet. And I think it's great that we're turning back. And so it's not just like a new pattern language we need to be developing. Part of that is returning to, and so this is part of the spiral. It's coming back around again, but you're not in the same place. We've progressed, but we actually do need to progress. I think that in what I've seen for permaculture, we talk about the ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. But if we had Venn diagram of earth care, people care, fair share, and really it's supposed to be at the intersection of those 3, which should be everything. But we teach permaculture like earth care is this big circle in the Venn diagram, and then there's been people care and fair share. And we're starting to grow the scope of social emotional literacy and the lack of skill. I've been working with eco-villages for over 20 years, and like I say, it's hardly ever the grey water system that's broken. And we can figure out or know how to fix the grey water system, but do we know how to be in relationship with each other to be able to manifest and maintain and have a flourishing grey water system where we're in right relationship with it, ourselves, each other. So my work has evolved to that I do mostly work in human permaculture and talking about human ecologies and social ecologies. And if I had $1 for every time a permaculturist said, I've developed this really good design, but it didn't work. It's like, usually they don't take a holistic frame. There's really nothing that couldn't or shouldn't be included in a good permaculture assessment or design. And where we fall short is the cultural understanding. And that includes the ecology itself, because we have human needs that run the show, and if we could be in co-creative, healthy, emergent, synergistic relationship to be more skilled at helping ourselves and each other meet our human needs in healthy ways, we wouldn't be in this bent out of shape basket going to hell. But I think that there's hope. People have said to me over the years, how do you sustain yourself? Like, how do you keep going? And for me, there was never really any question of keeping going. And the first real deep bobble that I've had is these past 3 or 4 years of the weirdness in the weather. It's like the distance of things we've been talking about is happening, and I'm letting that in. And I'm letting that be part of my culture so I can show up more into this work. And it's sacred work. People have trouble with those terms, but I guess the last thing I'll say is a little public pushback to the permaculture took, borrowed, lent from patterns in Native communities, yet there was a very deep violence that happened, which was, but permaculture is not spiritual. Do you see the pattern of colonialism in there? And so, thank God, I'm a woman. I'm tall, I've done a lot of masculine stuff, I've got a good brain, I've got a science background. So when I talk about holism, I can't get pushed aside as being woo-woo. But there are many of my sisters that were and still are. And that, to me, is inappropriate culture. That is perpetuating the cycles of violence. And these are the changes. For me, my permaculture is deeply spiritual. I have different faces and ways that I bring that are appropriate to this situation, but I will not stand and hold that there is not a place for that.
Thank you all. We have microphone repair happening in this panel as well. Apparently, we're going to keep passing this one back and forth. I feel really impressed by you all. To be honest, I didn't have too much of a clue who I was sitting down with today, and I just feel really, really humbled. I had a couple of questions prepared, and I've also learned to trust my intuition lately, and I just had this impulse, Tiffany, if you don't mind. I love the questions that were coming through you. This, what does it mean to be heroes? What does it mean to have stories? Who will we tell our children who our heroes are? What our values were? And I'm just curious with these kinds of questions coming up. What do you feel bubbling up in this conversation right now? And what's piquing your interest? Maybe if you had another question in this moment, what would it be?
I love questions because we have the opportunity to live into a question. When I think about the current dominant culture that particularly exists here in the country currently called the United States of America, particularly within our educational system and our social systems, we want everything to be complete. Everything has to have this kind of final answer and be wrapped up. And yet, the reality is there's so many mysteries in life itself that we're never going to know all of it, and that's okay. We have the opportunity to live into those mysteries, into those questions. So the question that is emerging for me right now, you asked me that, Ben, and in thinking about what each of my fellow members up here have also shared, and really holding space and listening to what you have also put into this co-created space together. The question that comes up is, really the sense is on the individual level, how am I cultivating myself and how I show up? Not only for me, but for my fellow members, right? And not just the people that you see in my family, we would say part of our tribe, but not just the people that you see that's directly related to you. How are you cultivating yourself to show up for those that you see outside of your circle or your family or your kin or your tribe? And then holding that question and thinking back to our younger generations, how are you cultivating our younger generations that are coming up right behind us? And in some ways, I would say leading the charge right now as well, to interact with people that they may be told socially is outside of their circles. Because it does go back to relationship. And the work that I do, to me, everything always goes back to relationship. And I also think about even from Buddhist perspective, about this concept of right relationship. But those are the two questions that's coming up right now. Do any of you have anything?
I just thank you for bringing in the component of the youth and the importance of that. I've just found that there's such incredible power in, so the weekend before I came here, I was helping lead a camp out with a bunch of girls in this program I work with called Gaia Girls, which we're working on relanguaging and making more queer and inclusive, as a side note. but we sent them out into the darkness to build their own fire. And I think that just felt like, so much of the reason people don't act is because they don't feel like they're capable of it, and they're not, and that's not their fault. We don't have community structures that can really support our youth and help them grow into full children, full adults. So we have a bunch of, adult children kind of walking around who've never really done the inner work and done the maturing that they need to do. And I just really love this concept of going into the darkness and building your own fire and tending your own fire, and knowing that you can do that. And you've got your community with you, supporting you, and there if you need it. I have a 2-year-old, and it's really incredible. Like, she picks and eats wild plants and mushrooms, and she can identify them on her own. You know what I mean? Like, I barely teach her that. She just figures it out. When you give them the space and time to just be able to explore, they figure so much out. It's incredible. But you have to also have that level of support behind them. It's not about just like sending them out alone. It's about sending them out, but then being kind of right nearby where you're there, and they know that you're there.
So again, the question was, how am I cultivating my individual self and showing up for those outside of who I normally consider clan, tribe?
Can I introduce the idea of the story, the importance of story in culture? Just to recap back to the beginning question, maybe tie things together a bit here, these incredibly rich contributions. A community, a culture, is a set of practices and institutions that hold a community together, that connect individuals to other individuals, connect the community to place, and connect that place to the planet Earth, and ultimately the Earth to the cosmos. And our situation now is that we have a global culture that is dysfunctional, and that it's built on fundamental fallacies that separate us from the Earth and separate us from one another. It's a culture of competition, it's a culture of individualism, competitive individualism, it's a culture of materialism. We're very familiar with the story. It's the story of separation, as Charles Eisenstein calls it. And clearly what we need is a new story, which I think is emerging. I think we all have a sense of a new story emerging, which is an evolutionary story, which connects humanity to place, to the Earth, and the Earth to the cosmos. What we're still having difficulty with is the cultural component between individuals and between communities, because we don't have a shared story. And what I'm suggesting is that the way forward is for the culture as a whole to embrace the process of cosmology building, where each individual sees themselves as responsible for constructing their own worldview. Every culture is based on a worldview. It's based on a reality map that tells you what's important, what's good, what's beautiful, and what's true. These have generally been handed to us. We're born into them. Our ethnic group, our religion, our place, wherever we are on the planet. The dominant one, which we all share, we're all a part of this, and we're all trying to sort of extricate ourselves from this and work out to what extent we're still importing aspects of this in us, and we're looking to indigenous cultures and ancient cultures and trying to imagine future cultures. What I would suggest, what I work with my students in Hawaii, and I do this in every class I teach, is to encourage every student to be author and agent of their own worldview, to take charge of the planet, and do so in cooperation and collaboration with everybody else in the class, as much as possible, and everybody else on the planet. So on the one hand, you're constructing a worldview yourself. On the other hand, you're sharing your worldview with everybody else, and you're doing it in a way where you try and see the world from the point of view of the others. And that has to include, ultimately, the whole of humanity, the whole planet, because we're dealing with a planetary emergency. It's an enormous undertaking intellectually, because cosmologies, worldviews build up over centuries and generations. We don't have that time, we've got about a decade, if we're fortunate to turn this around. But I think it's happening, and I think that the anarchist movement has intimations of this, but I think that what is often missing is this idea that we have one shared story that we're working towards. But it's not imposed from top down, it's not imposed from sideways, it's something that's emerging, it's an emergent property of individuals trying to figure it all out for themselves, and doing so in a spirit of democratic and egalitarian sharing. And this could be the model for a self-organizing community which is bioregional, which is local, as well as global. What I'm suggesting is that this could be a cultural meme that is viral, that goes viral. Thank you.
Well, whatever I say, I hope I don't offend anybody here. Okay? I've been traveling last few years. How many of you guys have heard of Standing Rock? Okay, Standing Rock. My elder, who I stayed with, his name is Mwanase. Beautiful elder. Very profound spiritual man. And one thing that he told me, and many people that were there, those of you, how many people know what a medicine wheel looks like? Something here, like that, with all the colors. Usually has all the 4 colors. And within the medicine wheel, when I say, he would tell me, like, right here, Standing Rock. He pointed right there at the middle. So when all the people from around the world came together, he said, that's where we are. And he pointed at Standing Rock. He's from there. He said, this is where we are right now, at that center. That's a place of healing. And so that's what Standing Rock represented, as an opportunity for us people from all over the world, all the tribes, all the colors, all the backgrounds, and the different generations of people that came together. And this was a place of healing. And it was a place that our people have begun to walk in this direction together, Just like we mentioned out here earlier today, like a lot of our great chiefs that you all know and heard about, like Chief Joseph, the Crazy Horse and whatnot, that they, in their time, they did not have this opportunity like we do right here, to begin this conversation. And I spent some time with a few ladies out here, and we had this difficult conversation. But this is a conversation that needs to happen in this time in history. How do we move forward? How do we go forward with different cultures and ideas? I've been into groups where wealthy, non-indigenous people make, and I guess you would say, how they want things to go, but the indigenous voice is kind of left out over here, and we're not included in any form at all. But we're great for photo ops, that we're there, and they've used us in those matters. And we see that, that has happened. And I've been in places where that has happened, and they used our imagery so they could get money to fund their ideas of what cultural, and unity should be. But our voice is never heard. Our ideas are never heard. And it's like our brother and the elders that were spoke today, and I'll share that with you. Is a lot of our culture, we understand, and this is like with the dominant culture today. We put ourselves way up here. We have technology, and we have these papers on our wall that says we have these degrees, we have this paper in our wallet that says we have all this money and big houses. So we're all up here and we've got these suit and ties and all these other things, big fancy home. So we put ourselves way up here ahead of everything. But within our culture, we humble ourselves and we understand that these animals were here before us. These plants and trees, all these things were here before us. As human beings, we were the last ones to be here. The foods, the medicines, those things that we eat and learn to heal ourselves, we were taught by the animals, our ancestors, how to heal ourselves and take care of ourselves. Our people lived very healthy. You know, we had ways to live. We had protocols in our way of life, and our connection with the foods, with the water, Tampula, with the 4 seasons. We lived in this way. We lived with each other. But those things were forgotten because of need, because of greed, all of these things, you know. So the indigenous voice is often not recognized. It's put aside. It's not important. That's old stuff. You know, that's way back then. Get over it. You know? So to me, I'm an advocate for a way of life. You know? I think it's also a very amazing time in the history of this world that we have an opportunity to stand together, brothers and sisters of all colors, shapes, and sizes, you know, but we have to relearn these things, these archetypes that we put ourselves into, you know, and change the way of our mind, but we can't disregard that culture, that traditions, and the things that brought us a lot of peace in this world, in our life, in our medicine ways. Those things still have value, a lot of value. And there's so much that, you know, that we can offer to the world, you know. But we just need the world to hear and listen and give us an opportunity. You know, so I thank you for allowing me, you know, to share some moments here. My sister here, she asked me to be in here. I'm like, well, I'm going to probably piss a few people off. I don't want to do that. I want to show you love. I want to show you happiness. I love everybody. You know, I travel all over this nation. I've gone from coast to coast, you know, and I've seen all sorts of people, you know. I hugged a naked man at rainbow gatherings. You know? Yeah. There's a lot of stories I want to share with you guys about. So please get with me after this. And I really wished I could have been with you guys, you know, this whole weekend. But I spent a whole day traveling just to be here with you guys. And so much I want to give. So much I want to share. I want to write a book, you know, I want to share all these things with the world, and I want to help with this repair. And I want to learn from each and every one of you guys, you know. I have so much to learn and to grow with you. And we got to teach our kids, you know, but we got to also learn from our elders and traditional people, our values and cultures. Thank you.
Carry on what all you learned. Do you have others that grow gardens and food that you help with your information?
Right now, in 2 weeks, I'm going to be doing a little land project at my home in Espilum. Last year, we did our first gathering this last fall, and Skeeter was there, and some of my friends here that came, and we did this. We brought the kids in and to learn, but we also did like with the medicines, foods, and high tannin, and all sort of things, trying to get back to our life skills. And that's what I'm currently trying to do, is just fundraise, you know, so we can put another camp on. and work with the kids, but we also to learn the indigenous foods, our roots and berries, medicines, herbology, permaculture, and Skeeter came and helped us do some plant a garden, and in 2 weeks we're gonna put some more seeds in the soil and learn. So yes, we are learning, and I'm currently going out into the mountains, and I gathered some medicine from the mountains on my way down. So I'm learning about the ethnobotany, the plants and those things.
So I grew up with parents who had me when they were 19 and 20, young. And I've done without in a lot of ways. Some ways I've been very privileged, in other ways not. But turning the problem into the solution, which is one of the phrases that we have in permaculture, is it's helped me to be more aware than some of how important it is to presence another human being in their process. And we all know that we're going to age, but it happens and it kind of sneaks up on us. Maybe some of you have experienced that, and now I'm in my mid-50s. And I knew it was going to happen. Over the past few years, an increasingly important part of my work is showing up for the next generation. And they are very different beings than my generation and half a generation or a full generation older than me. And I need to keep giving space for that difference to not only be met, but to emerge. And I too resonated with your questions, and one of them was, who do we want to become, that Ben's lifting up. And what I saw was that I have a tendency to work with young men who were at first in their mid-30s, and essentially they wanted to become good men. And to me, that's it, that's all the lessons in teaching are helping towards that. And there's such a lack of intactness, there's such a lack of support and good messaging. And one of the things that I saw was that divine intergenerational rightness of presencing other, and even and sometimes especially if it's opposite gender, and being able to be in intimate conversations about what it is to be a good man. And that also brings in what I was looking for, am looking for. But being able to be clean and grounded about that and to be in that dance. And one of the patterns we've been bringing in permaculture since we brought in forest gardening is, the 8 layers of an intact forest, where we have the canopy trees, we have the understory trees that are shade tolerant, we have the woody plants that are bushes and shrubs, and we have herbaceous grasses, the ground running vines, the climbing vines, and then the roots and the tubers. And now, another violence that we've done, and we're beginning to understand of what's underneath the ground is actually what is driving the whole thing, right? So one of the patterns that I've used, we talk about using nature as a model, is to bring that patterning in, but apply it to social and human landscapes. So especially when working with community, it's a very beautiful tool to help people see the culture of their community through the meme or the patterning of different elements of the forest. And so some people who are canopy trees, who maybe were the pioneer that came in, that helped to shelter that soil and bring humidity and microbes in to grow, maybe they're now taking up a lot of the resources, and it might be an opportunity to start self-pruning so that there's more space for the understory to come up through. And that's also been a really beautiful way to convey a profound message that in regular cultural terms would be rife with triggering. So it's I think, quite a lovely example of how we can use nature, and this is an example of social permaculture. This is a dance of exploration. I don't feel like I have it figured out, but I know I'm willing to show up for the conversation. And first lunch that I was here, I ran into Ryan at lunchtime and he just met me. He was like, Jillian, I've been quoting you since I met you at the Northwest Permaculture Convergence, and I was just tuned in and I was like, oh right, you're one of the main reasons I'm here. Thanks for reminding me. And I tuned in to him and I said, who's your posse? Let me see that level. And he was like, that one, that one, that one. Another one on the pass, this one. Oh, okay. So we've been weaving. And I said, this thing ends at 5 o'clock, but why should I go home? As lovely as Nyla's house is, it's not a high and good use of me to just go back to her place. Let's hang out. And he says, what about that tree? Tell your friends. And we're gonna hang afterwards and weave whatever it is that wants to emerge. And it's not just about me, it's about all of us. And how can we co-create those opportunities? Because they are wanting to be met. We are tribal species, and there's a place of that holding and direction from the older generations that is part of our DNA that we've lost, and the hunger is deep and strong. And even if we don't fully know, let's rebuild it, reweave together, and learning from native traditions and traditions all over the world. My experience of religion, they're all pretty much saying the same or similar thing. And with my Africans, where we have to, in the pattern of the 5 prayers a day, so everything we do is punctuated in that weaving, I've been encouraging the bringing it off the mat and into the permaculture conversation. What is the messaging in the Quran? And from what I could tell, it's about how to be a good person. And the last time I was just there, they gave me as I left a present of the Quran in English so that I could read it. And what I would say is, I'm also a child, and I have feet that I need to sit at to become whole. I have laps that I want to put my head in so I can cry. I want to be met and present so I can do my healing work, so that I can continue to show up. So when I'm with them, it's like, I want to support you to grow so you can help me grow and heal, and we can figure this out together. Thanks for being such a beautiful young man on the path.
Thank you, Jillian. Just want to echo a couple of pieces that are really resonating for me right now. You talked about turning the problem into the solution, and you talked about pissing people off. And with your words, and I think that you're on the right track, and you're on the edge of cultural change when people are getting pissed off. So that's a good thing. So maybe that happened. Maybe somebody did feel upset or something. I wasn't the person that said anything you said, but I think that there's a great edge to work with. When something somebody says upsets you, or you get into a conflict with somebody. I wonder how many of those eco-villages that you've visited have fallen apart because of people avoiding conflict more than actually engaging with the conflict, right? And when we turn towards the issue, when we look at why am I pissed off? Why is this bothering me? We can actually transform that problem into a solution. The same way that the fungi I was talking about at the beginning, transforms this pollutant that could, originally would hurt it, but once it figures out how to deal with it, it becomes a food source, and it transforms something that was harmful and toxic into fertile soil and food, and feeds the ecosystem with it. And Yeah, I just think that's such a huge piece of any kind of culture repair. You need to include not fixing conflict, not conflict, even conflict mediation. It's not about reducing the conflict, it's about engaging the conflict and working with the conflict and transforming it so that we don't hide from it and so that it can become food and it can become healing for our communities.
Speaking of healing, thank you all. This is also a body repair panel, so feel free to stretch a little bit. We've got about 15 minutes left. And we're going to take some questions. Speaking into a little bit of what Jillian just mentioned about, weaving in what wants to emerge. Too much sitting. The first question I saw was Grandma Aggie here in the front row.
I was just wondering if all of you, where you live, do you go to those that are growing gardens and make sure that you're doing their planting and everything in a good way? Or do you just do where you live? Does your knowledge go around your vicinity to people that grow things?
How many people have a green thumb? Not me. I don't have a green thumb at all. My people were never gardeners, and so, historically, a lot of people don't do that. So a lot of our plants and things we gather, but I wanted to learn, and I have a big, huge task in front of me, and believe me, I'm very intimidated by the gardening stuff, I'm like very frightened because it's a lot of work, things I don't know about, and nobody to really teach me, so I'm trying to learn through the 4-H program, to go to their classes and to learn. And I get on Facebook a lot and I ask people, what should I do? And like right now we got starter plants, so this will be my first time planting since I was like a little kid. When I was a little kid, my mom would give us all little seed packets, my brothers and me, and I had beets or radishes. And as a kid, I was out there every day watering it and weeding it and stuff. And out of my brothers and me, mine was the only one that grew. They didn't take care of theirs, and so theirs didn't grow. But I remember the pride of eating that, that vegetable during dinner time, thinking, wow, I grew this, and everybody must ate it. So this has always been something in my mind to do. And all I could say is, I just took this responsibility on myself because where we live on our reservation, if you go into our grocery store, there's no organic vegetables whatsoever. If you looked at our foods that are for sale, you definitely would probably like, oh, no, what is that? Some of this meat looks a little brownish, and some of the vegetables look like they could have been, past the due date. And the food sources we have is just not very good quality. And when you want to buy organic food, you can't afford that. You can't afford it. So we have to learn how to plant and grow our gardens. And I'm trying to take this on and to learn, but it's intimidating. It's very intimidating to me. But I have 1 acre, and I figured, okay, and we have arid land where I live, and I'm thinking, okay, of me being a man, living on poor soil, can do this with no experience with 1 acre, and we could be successful at it. Wouldn't that encourage more people to do it? So I'm trying to learn to do it, so I take that on myself to do it. I need help, because we're going to do our first planting this year, and I'm like pretty intimidated at the work, that's going to require. So I'm just grateful to be here, but more than that, My hope is go back into our culture, how our people used to trade. We used to have a network to trade. My hope and thought of this is with our different communities, with our skills, knowledges, and resources of foods, that eventually we have these communities, all over, and we're able to come over to the coast, learn from the skills and share your resources. Next month we might have a gathered in Oregon or Montana or Eastern Washington, whatever, but we trade, have this network to trade and friendship and relationships and develop unity and relationships, with that. So that's my hope through this, to inspire our youth that we get together through foods, through the land, and our skills and relationships. So I'm really thankful to Nahali and the Potlatch grant who helped me last year. But this year I'm kind of on my own, so I don't know. We're just going to try it out. So that's all I have to say.
So for this question, I'm going to start on the end and speaking about sharing knowledge. And I would say for me, one of the things that I've been sitting with, because one, I'm also very much still learning as well. And so I also have to remember that kind of placing for myself too. I'm very generous with my time, and time where that shows up in the knowledge that I do currently have, whether it's other types of resources that I have. And so one of the organizations that I work with is called the Puyallup Watershed Initiative. And we actually have communities of interest, which is basically a model of people who have a shared interest. They come together around that interest and seeing what they can do. And how do we start to really put into practice ways of self-organizing, thinking about decision-making. One of the things that I care deeply about is also talking about power dynamics, because oftentimes we don't talk about power dynamics and how that shows up as well. And knowledge within itself, if we think of knowledge in that way, knowledge oftentimes is also used as a form of power too. And so when we talk about that sharing and distribution of knowledge, and particularly when it comes to our food, because food is life, right? It literally nourishes this vessel in which we live. And so being able to have access to that knowledge, being able to have access to land, for example, being able to have access to just understanding your own genetic relationship to the foods that your body responds to, right? Those are the types of projects and things that I'm supporting. One of our COIs is called Just and Healthy Foods. Another project that I'm doing is on the East Coast, and it's particularly within a rural community. I definitely have a sweet spot for rural communities. My maternal family has lived basically several generations in the southeastern part of the United States here. And they live in a rural area. And so sometimes there are some distinct differences from being in a rural community versus being in an urban community. And I remember growing up very closely with my elders. And one of the first lessons that you learn, we have red dirt. And that's what my grandfather used to call it, this red dirt. And in our family, red dirt, that was part of our people, right? And we've been on the same land, and my family still lives on this same land to this day. And so being able to take what I've learned growing up and doing that in the work that I do now, I also put my money into projects as well. So when we think about what does it mean to have, actual seeds from your communities, right? What does it mean to be able to have seed sharing? Because part of it, there is this economic piece that goes into it when you talk about food, that sometimes I think gets kind of scuffed under the rug. There are other ways of also sharing and being able to cultivate that doesn't have to rely on these dominant systems. I'm so excited. I'm looking at you, Shaylee, because I'm thinking about what you were sharing with me a bit ago about these alternate currencies, and thinking about it from even within farming, right? And sharing food. So I would say Shaylee's another person to speak with as well.
At my university in Hawaii, West Oahu, we've started a sustainable community food systems program inspired by the vision of making the Hawaiian Islands food self-sufficient. Before contact, there was a population on the Hawaiian Islands of Native Hawaiians, which is equivalent to the present population, about 1 million people, living with Stone Age technology at a higher standard of health and apparently happiness than the current population. And so we're working with the Native Hawaiian community out in the Waianae, which is near where the campus is situated, where there's an organic farm that is not only teaching organic farming, sort of modified permaculture, but connecting it to the indigenous practices, terra cultivation, the lo'i, in a system of laulima, of cooperation, which is, according to the old Hawaiian practices, but rooted in this sort of primal model of self-organizing, democratic, egalitarian societies, which seems to have been the default universal model. So it's really weaving together a process of food production, dealing with health and wellness issues in the Native community and in the general population, but also with a consciousness of the whole global situation, recognizing that the Native Hawaiian community on the islands is actually the youngest indigenous culture on the planet, the last to arrive out of that great journey, which, appropriately enough for me, started in my home of South Africa. And so we're actually pioneering a program where we take Native Hawaiians back to the point of origins, to South Africa, to, at the same time as they're working on helping the local community connect to the land again and healing the local community, interacting with the global community and generating a global consciousness of a single humanity that needs to come together according to the same principles. Multi-layered program.
Are any other questions burning?
Hey, thank you, all of you, for what you're sharing and bringing forth. I feel curious to hear if any of you feel called to speak about how rite of passage ceremony and initiation can be a part of cultural repair, whether it be for adolescents, adults, elders, the whole spectrum.
Thanks, Randy.
I mean, I'm maybe newer to this than some other people here, but it's, it's what I've been really focused on the last couple of years. And I know that initiation and rites of passage, whatever we want to call it, is something that's been a part of every culture, every intact culture everywhere in the world. And so it's within all of us, and it is, there is this pattern and that you see in it of severance, leaving your community, and having some sort of experience, and then coming back and integrating it and being held. And there's often a challenge involved. There's one indigenous community in Mexico where I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the people, but what the young girl does is she makes, she spends days and days and days grinding